So good afternoon, everybody. And since you enjoyed the humor this morning and we're all settling in, I'll tell you a few little stories as we're settling in. One of which has not been approved by Paul at all, okay, but, well, the first is something a little more safe. This concerns two Protestant ministers in the same town, Reverend Taylor and Reverend Gray, and they had to share this particular town, different congregations, and they didn't like each other. But through 25 years, they had to work together. And one day, Reverend Taylor had to introduce Reverend Gray on the stage. And so he pointed to him, he says to the people, "That's Reverend Gray. And as you know, Reverend Gray and myself haven't gotten along all that well through all these years. But that's not important. Because after all, we're both doing the Lord's work, he in his way, and I in God's way." Okay. And this is an old Irish nun's story, but they tell a story of some years ago in Ireland. There were two sisters, and they were driving a little red mini car, and they wanted to stop at a supermarket on the way home, and they just needed a pint of milk, and the one sister told the other, says, "I'll run in and I'll get the pint of milk, and you should keep circling because there's no parking spot." So she went in to get the pint of milk. She comes out, and she can't find her sister or the red mini. So she stops the man, she said, "Sir, have you seen a nun in a red mini?" Okay. And he said, "Not since I stopped drinking." Okay. Now this is the story that Brother Paul didn't vet. It concerned two Holy Cross brothers. And the one came to a house, he hadn't been there for some months, and he noticed his other brother was wearing an earring. And it kind of startled him. He said, "Jack," he says, "I didn't know you wore an earring." And Jack said, "It's no big deal. Don't even ask me about it." He said, "No," he said, "I didn't ever take you to be the type of guy who'd wear an earring." And Jack said, "Look, Paul, it's not a big deal. People wear earrings all the time." He said, "How long have you been wearing an earring?" He says, "Ever since the Superior found it in my car." Okay. 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 Sorry, Paul. Okay. Okay, I can see that didn't go so well. Okay, okay. Okay, I just want to answer that last question from this morning before we go into some of the biblical stuff for this afternoon. Because it's a very important question, and a question people are sorting out about the pros and cons of temporary commitment. You know, given that where our culture is at, what is the value or a non-value? You know, could we have religious orders, really, or forms of religious life which are just predicated on temporary commitment as opposed to the classical, you know, it's so many years and you make final vows and so on. Well, just about 3 or 4 things, because there is no right or wrong answer to that. No, there are no normative, you know, this is right or this is wrong. So it's more, what's its value and what's its non-value, you know, because it's not a bad thing to make temporary commitment. So it's not like permanent commitment's right and temporary commitment's wrong. They're both commitments. Commitment is valuable, okay? It's more a question, I don't think you answer the question of is it good or bad, but we answer the question more in terms of, you know, are they at the same depth and the same level? Obviously, temporary commitment's good, okay? The question is one better, okay? And so it's a question of more at what depth do we buy in? Now there's strong arguments made both ways, so that in fact today I think one of the things we have to be careful about in the church all the time, and that is there's always a new Puritanism or a new harshness or a new doctrinaire. That's always true in every year of the church, you know, and so that to remain compassionate, I'll talk about that in a few minutes, like Jesus, to understand, to open and make God available to people, we have to be careful how rigid we get, always. That's always a warning. And so that's one of the things that's can be said in favor of, you know, that we accommodate in its best sense to taking, you know, and you take people where they're at, you know. Very bluntly, you know, I look at our culture, a lot of my nephews and nieces and so on, they're really good kids. They have a different theory of of sexuality, of marriage, and so on. It doesn't make them bad people. I'm not sure it's the ideal theology of marriage we want. This may work for them, and they may well go to heaven. It's not necessarily something that we'd enshrine and make an ideal theology of marriage. So I want to say two things about simply the value of permanent commitment, because permanent commitment is valuable doesn't mean temporary commitment isn't good. Just want to say something about the deep value of permanent commitment. I was in a class way back, the early 70s at USF with Raymond Brown, the great scripture scholar. And somebody asked him that question one night. They said, Father Brown, where does it say in Scripture that commitment has to be permanent? Like, why couldn't we just have, whether priesthood, sister, religious life, you do it for some years and you put your heart into it and you leave it. And Brown said, well, if you're looking for a particular text in Scripture, that's not where you look. He said, but to answer that question, you need to look at Jesus. And you ask yourself, in Jesus and his fundamental gift to the world, can something like that be done on a temporary basis? Or isn't it the permanency of it the thing that seals and gives depth to everything? So that if Jesus had, done what he did and taught what he taught, and after a while said, I think I've done my part. I'll marry Mary Magdalene, we'll live in the desert and raise sheep, and I've done my piece. Wouldn't have made him a bad person. It wouldn't have finished his ministry and his person as it did with this. And I want to appeal to that because, today in our culture, which I hope I'm saying has many good, strong points, but one of its points that isn't strong is we are not good on fidelity at any level. That we are getting so used to non-permanence in our lives that we're becoming skeptical and agnostic about the possibility of permanence. I'm with a missionary order, and a couple of my colleagues have shared that with me. They'll go on, we're in a lot of Indian reserves. They say when they go on to a native reservation right now, he said, what the first question people ask him? How long are you going to stay? They're used to people coming temporary and moving on. They said the first and most important question they asked, how long are you going to stay? Are you here for the short term or are you here for the long term? See, that question that's unconsciously in everybody's minds when they look at anybody in commitment today. How long are you going to stay? And see, so that the ideal of religious life, the ideal of married life, the ideal of friendship and everything, the ultimate ideal is always permanency. That fact doesn't make the other thing not good. Temporary commitment is very good. The full gospel, the fullest expression, to my mind, demands still, not just in religious life, in anything, in friendship, in family, and everything, it demands a permanent commitment of some kind, And again, I want to say this cautiously, it doesn't mean temporary commitment isn't good, isn't valuable, isn't something we can't work with. Because these things aren't all or nothing. They're both and, So it's not a question, we have to have a form of religious life that's only permanent or only temporary. No. It's at what level does each community and individual, at what level do we want to speak our message? Okay. I want to do a couple of more biblical images with you, and then keep my eye on the clock, maybe suggest some directions at least that we should go. Okay. So this morning we looked at, continuing to make the wine, to have the baptism of John, of Jesus, and so on. Now, let me give you a couple of others. The next one it says, to continue to sing sacred songs inside of the flames. What does that mean? To sing sacred songs inside of the flames. That's an image from the book of Daniel. It's a powerful image. In the book of Daniel, we have no idea how historical or non-historical that book is, but it's a wonderful image. And today, sometimes when I pray, I can't find a better book after I've watched the news or better prayer to say than Daniel's prayer. Remember that wonderful prayer he says at one stage? He says, Lord, today we have no king, no prophet, no leader, no first fruits, no language. We don't even know how to pray anymore. Sometimes you watch the news and we don't have a king, we don't have leaders, we don't have saints, we don't have first fruits, and so on. But Daniel gives the impression there was a certain time where the whole world just went nuts. And nobody could trust anything anymore. And he says everybody began to apostatize. The whole society, everybody began to apostatize, except these 3 young men. So you had 3 young men, and they refused to apostatize. And so King Nebuchadnezzar, even the name sounds archetypally bad, okay, power hungry. He brings the 3 young men and he says, now you'll apostatize or you will die. So they refuse to apostatize, so he gets very angry. So he told his people, he says, now raise the furnace that we're going to burn them in alive, make the flames 7 times hotter than usual. So you get the impression they really fired up this furnace. And the flames were 7 times the normal temperature, and then they tossed the 3 young men into the flames, expecting them to be burnt to a crisp. Well, they opened the door, and Daniel said, here were the 3 young men walking right inside of the flames, and the flames didn't have power to touch them because they were singing sacred songs inside of the flames. That is a great image for prayer in an intoxicating culture and in the place where we walk. See, today, it doesn't take much of a stretch to get this image. We are walking, remember I talked this morning about it, just used a different image. We're walking in the greatest freedom human beings have ever known. But sometimes the flames there are 7 times hotter than usual. And they're the flames of greed, of anger, of ecclesial bitterness, the flames of sex, of lust, of pleasure, of power, and so on. We don't walk in an easy time. We walk in an interesting time. We walk in an important time. But we don't walk in an easy time. This is not an easy time to be a religious, to be a committed person walking this planet, and to keep vows, particularly of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The flames get 7 times normal heat sometimes. But the secret is, see, as long as we are singing sacred songs inside of the flames won't touch us. But you have the impression from the text that if they ever stopped singing those songs, they would disappear fast. The flames would hurt them. You know, what are the secret songs? You know, have you ever wondered why in Christianity we have so much of a motif to give praise to God? You know, we're supposed to be we're doing these doxologies every day. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Glory be to God. You know, the Jesuits have as their motto, you know, all for the greater glory of God, which prompted some cynic to say, I don't think God needs the Jesuits to give him glory, you know. Well, no, God doesn't need any of us to give God glory, but we don't have to, God doesn't need, but we need to do that. Because the second we are not looking, this is metaphorical, this way, up towards God and giving it away, we're demanding that it comes this way. And the second we stop, you know, giving glory to God, singing sacred songs that fire, and I want to talk about this a little more deeply in a second. You know, the second we stop, you know, singing sacred songs, the flames are going to touch us. And we just have different Achilles heels. For some it'll be anger, for some it'll be sex, for some it'll be pleasure, for some it'll be whatever, power. But it's like the old Protestant dictum used to be, it's not a question of are you sinful, it's only a question of what's our sin? What's going to be our addiction? Where are the flames going to burn us? You know, we have to be singing sacred songs inside of the fire. You know, because otherwise, how do you, for instance, how do we live? To be very blunt, how do you live a chaste life? Or can you, in a culture like ours, when everything lives and breathes sexuality 24 hours a day? How do you live chastity inside of that? Well, we better be singing sacred songs inside of the fire because they're 7 times hotter than usual. Or how do we today in a church, in a society, which is really given over to a lot of polarization and anger and bitterness, how do you keep a mellow heart? How do you keep yourself from not getting angry, from not lashing out, from wanting to give the best to yourself? How do you keep a mellow heart in a bitter time? Or you can go further. In a culture where there's so much distrust and so much betrayal, how do you stay vulnerable? How do you keep trusting? How do you not get paranoid? You know, the flames of distrust in our communities and all over, they're 7 times the normal heat. How do you retain a soft, gentle, loving, you know, vibrant heart that's wine and is chaste all at the same time? And we better be connected to something else. Because, you know, we're inside the flames, and to not get scorched in there. That's the image. It's a wonderful image. To not get scorched inside of the flames, we better be connected to something else. And I want to give you an image from John's Gospel about connection. John's Gospel, which is set up very, very different than the other Gospels. Also, it's a very, very complicated Gospel. Some scripture scholar recently said, Mark wrote his Gospel first, and he tried to make it really simple, and nobody got it. So John said, what the hell, they didn't get a simple one. I want to make this really complicated. But it's really different. So notice in John's Gospel, there's no Christmas story, there's no baby Jesus or whatever. You just have that Greek prologue, and then you have Jesus full-blown adult, everything right halfway through chapter 1. And these are the first words out of Jesus' mouth in John's Gospel. He says, what are you looking for? People are looking at him out of curiosity. And he says to the disciples of John, what are you looking for? Okay. And then they said to him, where do you live? And Jesus says, come, I'll show you. And that's the whole Gospel of John. Everything in John's Gospel is simply, Jesus is going to show us where God lives. He's way, truth, life, water of life, bread of life, and so on. And he has all this complex stuff in between. And then the original Gospel of John, which ended here, all scholars agree chapter 21 was tacked on. Okay, it ended with Jesus and Mary Magdalene on Easter Sunday, and Jesus asking her exactly the same question. See, so it begins with the question, what are you looking for? Then in John's Gospel, Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb on Easter Sunday. She sees Jesus, but she thinks he's the gardener. And then Jesus says to her, sometimes because in Greek it translates both ways, who are you looking for? But the text is more, what are you looking for? He asks Mary, he repeats the question, what are you looking for? And then she says, well, I'm looking for the body of Jesus, and if you know where it is, and so on. And then he answers the question of John's Gospel in one word, very simply. He just says to her, Mary. He pronounces her name in love. And the Gospel says, and Mary fell at his feet, began to worship him, and so on. See, that's John's Gospel in caption. John would say, what are we looking for? What are we looking for? And what can sustain us in the world? And for him, one thing. Ultimately, we are looking to hear God pronounce our name individually in love. To say Mary, Jennifer, Jack, Peter. Some years ago I went on a retreat, French-Canadian retreat director, and a master in the spiritual life, older man. And he had our whole community. I was in the general community in Rome. And he began this way. Comes in an older guy, says, and first I was a little skeptical. I thought, this sounds a little simplistic to me. And he said, I'm going to have a very, very simple retreat for you. I'm going to ask one thing. He said, I'm going to try to teach you how to pray this week. We've all been in this business for 40 years, He said, I'm going to try to teach you how to pray, but in a special way. He said, I want to try to teach you how to pray so that sometime, maybe not this week, maybe not even this year, but sometime in your life, you open yourself up in prayer that you can hear Jesus say to you, I love you. Because before you hear that, nothing in your life will ever be enough. You'll be searching for this, you'll be chasing that. You'll be dissatisfied about this, you'll be angry at somebody else, and so on. He said, because only one thing can make us whole. We need God say to us, I love you. And his whole retreat was on that. That's also, since it sounds really pious, that is the Gospel of John. I want to say something here, often not popular when I say this. But you know who gets the Gospel of John? The evangelicals. Now, they make it all of religion, but they get that part. The whole thing about Jesus is my personal Savior, that is the Gospel of John. Sometimes in the bigger churches, because we get so much of the rest of the Gospels, that we are in danger of losing that. In John's Gospel, you have that famous beloved disciple. Who is the beloved disciple in John? Well, we always think it was John. No. It's everybody. It's meant to be you. Notice the beloved disciple, he's at the foot of the cross. The beloved disciple is the person who's leaning on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper. That's an incredible mystical image. See, if you lean on somebody's breast, you can hear their heartbeat. So John has this idea that the disciple, the true disciple, is somebody who has their ear to Christ's heartbeat, but they're looking out at the world. You're hearing the beat of Christ's heart, but you're looking out at the world. And in John, that's the only thing that counts. Notice, and actually it's a cute text. See, at the Last Supper, Peter's the Pope. And notice he can't talk directly to Jesus. Jesus says, one of you will betray me. Peter leans over to the beloved disciple and says, ask him who it is. When the hell doesn't he ask himself, Because John has to power doesn't speak to Jesus. Nothing speaks to Jesus except intimacy. And you have to go, see, the Pope can't pray as Pope. The Pope can pray as Christ's lover, but the Pope can't pray as Pope. I can't pray as a president of a university. I can only pray as somebody who's intimate, as a beloved disciple. Now, like I said, the evangelicals, sometimes they don't get everything else. They get that. They said, religion, it's not the only piece of religion, as we say in Roman Catholicism, but sometimes we forget that piece, that the rest isn't going to work, that I can't live my vows, and I can't be chaste, and I was going to say sober, but that's a little easier than some of the others, and mellow, and non-paranoid, and loving, and produce wine, if I'm not intimately, somehow I'm getting fed by Jesus at some level that's deep and personal. And so that's a challenge, for us to give up that last 10% and so on. We need to become the beloved disciple. We need to sing sacred songs inside of the flames. Okay, just a couple more, and then I want to give some. Next one. We need to wash each other's feet. I want to talk about that. The need to wash each other's feet, that's John's image. But in the evangelists, you have the same thing, except they put it abstract. In the evangelists, the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they have Jesus simply saying this, which is a stunning and kind of a depressing line when you hear Jesus say this. Jesus says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Well, that's really hard to do. John Shea always says, nobody does Jesus real well. How do you be perfect? Well, here you have to make a distinction between the Greek idea of perfection, which Jesus wasn't, even though the New Testament. See, the New Testament's confusing. The New Testament's written in Greek, but it's not Greek thought. It's Hebrew thought. See, we think in Greek software, at least if you grew up in the West. Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Augustine wrote Windows 400, and we're still using it as the essential software that we're thinking in, okay? And see, for us as Greeks, that's the way to be perfect means you don't have any faults. See, to have a perfect body, to have perfect teeth, to have a perfect score, it means there can be no deficiencies. That's what the Greek word perfection means. But Jesus didn't mean it that way. For Hebrew, perfection meant compassion. It didn't mean you didn't have any faults. In fact, one of the evangelists puts it that way. He says, see, the others say, Jesus says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Luke says, be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. Perfection for the Greeks means compassion. But now what is compassion? Okay, to do this, I want to go back into the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, and talk about religious development. And you'll recognize so much of this today inside of ourselves and in our churches and so on. Walter Brueggemann, the great Protestant scholar, has done some wonderful work on this, and he's an Old Testament scholar. And Brueggemann says, if you look at the way the faith of Israel and its spirituality developed, you see different phases. So the first phase is what they call Deuteronomy. Okay, that's a word, covers a multitude of things, See, if you read the early chapters of Scripture of the Old Testament, when they first go into the Promised Land and they form as a people, that's the book of Deuteronomy. What's important to them? Notice what's important to them. What's important to them is identity. Who's in and who's out? What makes you a Jew? What makes you religious? What's important is doctrine. What is the proper doctrine? Catecheses, liturgy, rubrics. So in Deuteronomy, you have all kinds of, but you're in, you're out. This puts you in, this puts you out. This is identity. This is our catechesis. This is our teaching. Here are proper liturgical rubrics. Somebody can touch this, but they can't touch that. He can go in the sanctuary. He can't. Any of that sound familiar? Okay. See, that's Deuteronomy, and that's a legitimate and important part of religious development. And that went on for some hundreds of years. Hopefully it won't continue a few hundreds of years in our present situation, But notice, that's Deuteronomy concern. Who's in, who's out? What makes you a Roman Catholic? What makes you different than Protestants? What's the proper catechesis? What does the Catechism of the Church say? What are proper liturgical rubrics? How do you answer this prayer? Who can step into the sanctuary? Who can touch a cup? When should the priest go to communion? When should other people go to communion? So on. It's Deuteronomy. That has a certain importance. And that went on for 200 years or so on. And then the prophets came along, and the prophets looked at all of this, and they said, God doesn't care about that. And the prophets are real strong and said, God couldn't care about cups and this and that, and, who's circumcised. I'll tell you what God cares about. He cares about the poor. And remember, the prophets have these strong statements. They said, you know what religion is? Religion is taking care of widows, orphans, and strangers. And the quality of your faith is going to be, of the faith in the land is going to be judged by the quality of justice in the land. And justice in the land is always judged by how do the poorest groups survive. See, so a prophet look at North America, they say, God doesn't care about catechisms, doesn't care about, whether, you actually were baptized or weren't, or who's rubrically in the sanctuary and who isn't. So the quality of your faith is going to be judged by how are the poorest people in this country surviving. And remember, Jesus ratifies that. Actually, Jesus is going to ratify the first part too. Remember, Jesus says, you can't even toy around with one decimal of the law. But then later on, Jesus says, the last judgment, you know what's going to happen? Matthew 28. He says, we're going to come in front of Jesus and the great judge. And notice there's Matthew 28, there are no catechetical tests, no liturgical tests, no moral tests, no rubric tests. It just says, did you feed the hungry? Did you give drink to the thirsty? Did you clothe the naked? Did you visit prisoners? And Jesus says, that's the way you're going to be judged. That's the prophetic tradition. So, no catechisms anymore, okay? But notice the Old Testament doesn't end there, and neither does the New. The Old Testament doesn't end with prophecy. It's a very important thing. Remember, the prophet prepares the way for the Christ. The Old Testament ends with wisdom literature, and wisdom literature is the literature of compassion. That there's something, boundaries are important, but in the end, they're not as important as the poor. And taking care of the poor is also important, but at the end, something's even more important than that for you. And that's to have a heart that can embrace everything and everybody. Compassion. And compassion, as the way Jesus defines it, is a heart with a lot of rooms. Jesus gives the best definition of Catholicism that I've read. What does it mean to be a Catholic? And Jesus says, in my Father's house there are many rooms. See, Catholicism means wide, inclusive. And he illustrates that with stunning examples that I don't think we ever really take seriously. Jesus says, well, it's shown so beautifully in the parable of the prodigal son and the older brother, which is not a story of either the prodigal son or the older brother. It's a story of the compassionate father. Who's the most important person in Luke 15? The prodigal son? No. The older brother? No. The compassionate father. Remember, it's a parable about God. Here is a person who can embrace the weakness of the youth and the anger of the aged. He can embrace everybody. Jesus says, my Father lets his sun shine on the good as well as the bad. Like God's love and compassion is completely non-discriminatory. It's like the sun. Today the sun shines. It doesn't discriminate between vegetables and weeds. It just shines on everybody equally. God is love. Michael Hines, who's a wonderful theologian from Boston College, he tries to teach this by using strong examples, and I'll give you one of his, which I give him credit for. When he tries to teach this, Michael Hines always says, he asks people, he said, do you think that God loves Mary more than he loves the devil? It's kind of a strong statement. Do you think God loves Mary, the mother of Jesus, more than he loves the devil? No. God is love. Mary probably responds differently. Okay. But when we have that wonderful doctrine, which I wish we again put into our creed, he descended into hell. See, God's love even goes into hell. It goes every place. And ultimately, that's what we're asked to do. We are asked to become compassionate and to radiate in our personal lives, in our communities, that wide, expansive embrace of God. Now, that's in the Synoptic Gospels. I want to give it to you in John, because it's so powerful and so beautiful. John puts that into his image of washing the feet. Jesus washing the disciples' feet. That's a text that we we too easily put a secondary motif in place of the primary motif. All the homilies, with a few exceptions, that get preached on the washing of the feet, you know what we preach on? Humility. Isn't it wonderful that Jesus, who was the master, could wipe the disciples' feet? In fact, no, it's okay. This isn't something that water is going to help. Okay. No, I live in Texas, where at this time of year you got to take antihistamine medicine because everybody's allergic to everything, and it kind of builds up. And this will get better as okay. But thanks for the thought. See, so that in John's gospel, Jesus washing the disciples' feet, it's not so much a question of humility. That's a motif, but not the central one. I remember one poet who wrote beautifully on this, and this poet says, in washing the feet, Jesus took the mantle of privilege and he turned it into the apron of service. It's beautiful. That's not the central part of the text, though. What is the central part of the text? Well, when was this text written, and why, and where did John put it? Okay. The Gospel of John was probably written somewhere between the year 90 and 100. So Jesus has been dead for 70 years almost when this Gospel's written. And John is an old man in his 90s, and he's looking at the church of his time, and you know something? They were fighting as much as the church today is fighting. They fought about everything. For instance, especially about the Eucharist. How often should it be celebrated? Should it be celebrated every day? Should it be celebrated once a week, 4 times a year, or once a year? Sound a little familiar? And there were already 4 types of Christians. In John's time, some Christians, particularly his own community, had Eucharist every day. Some had it every Sunday. Some had it 4 times a year. Some called it the Lord's Supper. John never calls it the Lord's Supper, and so on. And they were already fighting in who should preside and where should it be, how much wine should you use. I'm sure they were arguing about the responses, So where the other evangelists have, at the Last Supper, Jesus took bread and wine, said, "This is my body." Notice John, the Last Supper, there's no bread and wine, Where the others have bread and wine, said Jesus took a basin, and he got up, and he started washing the disciples' feet. And they said, "Don't do this. It's awkward." And he said, "No, I got to do this." It's not so much a gesture of humility. You know what's a gesture of? It's a gesture of compassion and the cost of compassion. And the cost of compassion is this. And every time I've written on this, I've gotten into trouble, but I got good scripture scholarship backing me up. John is in essence saying this: give up your right to be right. Give up your right to be right. It's more important to be together than to be right. It's more important to have community than to be right. It's more important to be compassionate than to be right. Give you an illustration of what I mean. I think you'll get it from the illustrations. Today, you can take almost any moral issue in our culture, and we are bitterly divided. Let's take abortion. Pro-life, pro-choice. You know what John would do if he were here? He would get all the pro-life people and all the pro-choice people together, and he'd make them wash each other's feet. And you know what would happen? There'd be less abortions in this country. Because right now, on both sides, it's more important that we're right than that we stop abortions. Because the sad part is nobody wants abortions. Nobody wants abortions. Pro-choice people don't want abortions. Pro-life people don't want abortions. But sometimes it's so important that we're right that we're in fact not worried about the fetus. John would say, wash each other's feet. And in that compassion for each other, and with every issue, whether it's gay marriage, whether it's liberals and conservatives, John would say, wash each other's feet. And then it'll be more important for you at a certain point to be together than to be right. And that's a challenge. And that's also the maturity of religion. To get to heaven, you go through dogma and catecheses and liturgy, and we go through prophecy, but at the end, if we want to be with the Father, we have to have a heart like God that can embrace everybody. Because you might get to heaven and find out you're beside Adolf Hitler. It's good to get a little practice down here about stretching the heart. And so we need, because God's light shines on the good and on the bad. Notice the father of the prodigal son, he simply embraces everything and everybody. It doesn't mean we're wishy-washy. It doesn't mean our boundaries disappear. It doesn't mean we're no longer prophetic. But it means we don't stop at boundaries. And we don't stop with prophecy, compassion, Be compassionate as your Heavenly Father is compassionate. And I think today, again, to apply this to religious life, we really need communities of religious today and so on who can radiate that wide kind of Catholicism. A Catholicism that takes us beyond liberal and conservative, beyond what's old and what's new, beyond who's right and who's wrong and so on. A Catholicism that is a heart with many rooms, that your community is a community with many rooms, and there's rooms for people who wear religious habits, there's rooms for people who don't wear religious habits, and the rooms for everybody in between. There's rooms for pro-life, there's rooms for pro-choice, there's rooms for can we embrace that, Now, maybe we're not at a level where we can. Notice the other two levels, they're legitimate. It's legitimate to be in Deuteronomy. It's legitimate to be in prophecy. And sometimes we need to be there. But they're not the end of religion, To get to heaven, Jesus is saying you got to develop a heart that stretches and touches everybody. I better learn how to love pro-choice people. If I'm a liberal, I better learn how to love conservatives. If I'm a conservative, I better learn how to love liberals. And I better be able to have a whole ecclesiology and everything that goes beyond that. Jim Wallace, and many of you are familiar with his name, who I think is one of the fine ecclesial people writing today. And Wallace always says this. He always says, don't be a liberal, don't be a conservative, don't be a woman or a man of faith and go where that takes you. I always challenge students to say, tell me whether Jesus was liberal or conservative. Well, it depends from line to line, from page to page, from item to item. Jesus is fully compassionate. And sometimes that compassion takes you on liberal lines. Sometimes it takes you on conservative lines. Sometimes it takes you in the middle. I have friends of mine, they say, I'm not liberal, I'm conservative. I'm in the middle. Well, that's also an ideology. It's exactly the same ideology as being liberal or conservative. Say, I do my ideological judgments from the middle. No, that can be completely wishy-washy at times. Be compassionate and go where full compassion takes you. And at times it'll take you into Deuteronomy, times it'll take you into prophecy, and sometimes it'll take you beyond both of them and beyond where any of us are at right now. Be compassionate. See, full maturity. We're talking about the maturity to carry our freedoms today. We need to be like Jesus in full compassion. I want to do one more and then make some suggestions. And that is, because I promised I'd speak about to speak with authority. Okay? See, as religious today, our communities and individual lives, we have to speak with authority. What is that? Okay? Well, in the Greek New Testament, there are 3 words for authority, okay, or power. Sometimes translations have it, Christ spoke with great power. Remember, you read that in Scripture, they say, the scribes and Pharisees, they don't speak with power. And at times they don't have any power. They'll come to Jesus and says, we couldn't cast this demon out, and you could. How come? See, he could cast out demons with authority, with power. What was that power? Well, in Greek, there's 3 words for power. And we have 2 of those in English. And neither of the 2 is what they're going to say about Jesus, so you can erase those 2, okay? The first one is our word energy. They have the word energia, energy, literally. And see, energy is a power. Energy is the power of the athlete. Your middle linebacker, he has great energia. He'll sack the quarterback, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the weightlifter, that's great energia. That's a form of power. It's muscle power. It's athletic power. It's the power of youth. It's the power of energy. And notice they never say Jesus had that. They didn't say, he speaks with great energy. And then they have the power from which we get our word dynamic and dynamite. Dynamis. You have somebody, they're a dynamic person. Mick Jagger on the stage of the Super Bowl, he was dynamic. Mick came out and he strutted, and 100 million people stopped in their tracks. It's dynamism, charisma, great power of the rock star of Hollywood, whoever, and so on. They never say Jesus was dynamic. He may have been a shy introvert, low energy. They said he spoke with great exousia. We don't have no English word for that. Great power, but exousia, there's no English translation for it. Since I don't have PowerPoint, it's E-X-O-U-S-I-A. E-X-O-U-S-I-A, exousia. And the closest way you could get to translate it, exousia it's the power of vulnerability. Like a baby has exousia. If you put Mick Jagger into this room, doing his rock stuff, and you'd have the middle linebacker for UCLA, and you got a baby, which has the greater power? In the end, the baby. See, because it's a moral power. It's a power that comes from a certain innocence. It's a power that comes from non-hardness. It's a power that can melt hearts. Notice that's a power of fire. It's a power that can change you. Okay? And see, but actually there's a double thing there. Exousia, and they recognize that in Jesus. You speak with great power. There's a great vulnerability in Jesus. And notice whenever Jesus sends people out to preach, the first thing he does is he strips them of power. Sends them out to preach. Said, when you go, don't take any money, no haversack, no 2 sandals, no cloak, no nothing. And he's not talking about don't take a credit card. He's saying when you go out to preach, you got to have yourself on the line. You got to be vulnerable. If you're protecting yourself, you're not going to have any power. See, babies can't protect themselves, and for that reason, they have great power. That's why God was born in the straw. I always tell people, because I like this line, it's so important, we don't get it. I said, we always want power to be overwhelming. And you know what you say about God? The God Jesus revealed, God is thoroughly underwhelming at all times. The way a baby's underwhelming. God, anything that comes to you as power, as coercion, as force, as a threat, doesn't come from God. Babies don't threaten you at all. They cry and they plead and they touch your conscience. See, the power of God that Jesus revealed is always thoroughly underwhelming. God simply underwhelms you. Hollywood overwhelms you. Bad theologies overwhelm you. Bad things frighten you. You can be sure they're not from God. Babies come from God, and we recognize that. See, that's the first part, vulnerability. But the second part is that he's under somebody. See, Jesus is so clear all the time. What I'm doing, it's not coming from me. This isn't coming from me. It's coming from the Father. It's coming from above. It's coming from beyond, and so on, so that Jesus is never about Jesus. I sometimes say this to people, and they get, especially some people get pretty upset, Think about the word ego. We always say ego is bad. So I'll ask them a question. I said, do you think Mother Teresa had a big ego? Think John Paul II had a big ego? You think Therese of Lisieux had a big ego? Or Francis of Assisi? Or Clare of Assisi? Absolutely. In spades. They had huge, powerful egos. That's why they were huge, powerful people. Now, they weren't egotistical. That's something else. But Mother Teresa would walk in the room and, I am the most important, God-gifted person in this room. It takes one heck of an ego to do that. Or John Paul II in front of 4 million people, here I am. I'm a gift to you. I have never been able to do that. Even if the 4 million people showed up, I'd shrivel, It's not necessarily to my credit, See, sometimes ego can drift into egotism, But see, what was clear in all of them is they were not about themselves. They were under somebody else. See, that's what they recognized about Jesus. You have great power because it doesn't come from you. That's the centurion who says to Jesus, I'm not worthy to come under my roof. You just say the word. Just speak the word. And, the centurion was a soldier. You know what he's telling Jesus? He says, I know how power works. I'm a powerful man, not because I'm powerful myself. I'm in the Roman army. And if somebody messes with me, they're messing with Julius Caesar. And he says, when I notice with you, when somebody messes with you, they're messing with God. They're messing with, you're under somebody. See, so what gives us authority is when we're vulnerable and we're under God. So it's not a question of how energetic we are, how brilliant we are, how bright we are. Not that those are incidental. Those are also God's gifts. If you can be a bright, good-looking, brilliant, and you can look like Julie Roberts with your teeth besides and preach God's message, good, okay. That all helps. But the real power is in vulnerability and in being under somebody. They have to look at you and say, she's not about her, she's about something else. He's not about himself. That's all an unconscious judgment. And as soon as we're even a little bit about ourselves, there's certain demons we can't cast out. Certain demons we can cast out. And I've recognized that in myself. I'm very honest, because I think I'm pretty typical. I've been ordained for 34 years, And, I'm giving a lot of talks and get some good feedback sometimes and so on. And, but after 34 years, how many lives have actually changed? It's one thing to give a talk and someone will say, I really like that. You're pretty good. And I say, well, you're really bright. I can see that, But how many people changed their lives? How many demons can I cast out? Now I'm not talking about some, exorcist type of demon. But, where somebody comes to me and they're addicted or they got this weakness or they can't give up anger, and I preach and they can give it up. That takes a different kind of power. That takes a different kind of, I'm still looking for that kind of power. I know where it lies, and so do you. And it lies not in me getting ever more brilliant or getting an ever more refined language. It's only going to lie if I can be ever more vulnerable and ever more clear that I'm not about Ron Rolheiser, that I'm about somebody else. I'm about God. See, our orders have to do that. We have to radiate that we're not about us. We're about Christ. We're about the poor, And then we'll have power. We'll be able to cast out demons. And then we'll also have the power. That's my last point here. I'll just name some things and we'll stop. Then we'll also have the power to call. Let me talk about this. Today we're here and we're concerned about vocations. And one of the things about vocations I'm always have been convinced about, vocations have to be called. You don't volunteer for God. Maybe we think we do, but somebody called us. Be interesting, all of us in this room, if someone went back and said, where did your vocation come from? And if you have a real vocation, I suspect most of you do, or maybe all of you, somebody called you. Maybe your mother, maybe somebody you met, but somebody called you. But to call you, they have to first be themselves, have enough authority, which means be vulnerable and committed enough under God to have a right to do that. I was called by my parents, and they were immigrants, and they had their faults, but they were profound faith people who had their hour. They suffered enough. They knew what life was. They knew what it meant to give life away. They could come to me as a young man of 17 and say, I think you should go to seminary. I think you should be a priest. The world needs priests. See, my dad could say that to me. My mother could say that to me, and it had power because they had authority. Not that they weren't educated or whatever. They had the authority, said, because of the authority of their lives. They were a woman and a man of integrity who had given their lives away to others. And when you give your life away, then you have a right to say to somebody else, Mother Teresa or Jean Vanier, those of you know, they sometimes stun people. One of our oblate priests, he's a priest down in Vancouver and a very good one, he said he went on a Vanier retreat. He was a young man in his 20s. He walked into Vanier's office, and Vanier looked at him and said, what's your name? He said, Vincent. He said, I think you should be a priest. He said, I was so stunned. He said, it was so stupid. I knew it came immediately from God. Okay. And he became a priest. See, Vanier is a man who's just given his life away, and then he can ask you to give it away. If I haven't given my life away, I can't go up to a young man or a young woman and say, I think you should be a sister. I think you should be a priest. Because all this stuff is unconscious under the surface. They're going to say, you can't ask me that, because you haven't given your life away, even though you are a priest. Or you haven't given your life away, even though you are a sister, or you're my mother, or whatever. See, we only have power to call if, going back to the very first story I told you, Mary comes up to Jesus and she says, I know wine. What about turning this wine? Jesus says, my hour hasn't come yet. And he's saying, I haven't put my life on the line yet. It's a little early for me to be doing this. We're vocation directors, all of us. But to ask some woman or man, young woman or young man, say, I think we want your life. You could serve us, and it's going to be a dog's life, and we wonder how good you're going to look on wood, And in the end, those have to be the real vocation lines. I mean, not, join the sisters and see the world and so on. When we're young and romantic, some of that is helpful. But in the long run, we're calling a person to walk in the footsteps of Christ, which is the crucifixion, which is, the hour has to come. But it's very important that we have the authority to do that. And the authority comes not from how dynamic I am, whether I'm good looking or not good looking, whether I'm young or old or whatever, but have I put my life on the line? Has my hour come? Okay, I just want to name some parts. I've got 6 minutes left according to this clock, and if I can find where okay. I want to make some suggestions in terms of directions we could go. And I'm going to name those rather than explain them, and then we can talk about them if you want and so on. I want to just suggest 5 practical directions that we need to go. I mean, practical, general directions we need to go in religious life today. And since I have exactly about 5 minutes, it'll be about a minute apiece. But I think to name them. And that is that today what we need to do in religious life is we need to work at re-inflaming the romantic imagination. Okay? What do I mean by that? See, the romantic imagination is different than the intellectual imagination. It's different than the theological imagination. Very simply put, I live at a college right now where I work there. We have in a magnificent library attached to our school, or you go to any theological library, we've written the best theological books ever written in the last 35 years. We have enough good literature today in theology to save 2 worlds. Now, first of all, today hardly anybody ever goes into a library anymore. I just heard on the news this morning, they started a new school in Philadelphia, Microsoft, which no books. Everything's electronic, But anyway, the issue today is not that we don't have great theology and great scripture scholars and so on, and great scripture scholarship. We don't have romance. Francis of Assisi, you know what made him so great? He wasn't a great theologian. He was a great artist. He was a great saint. When he took off his clothes and walked naked out of Assisi, that was worth more than a lot of books. See, he caught the romantic imagination. We've got 700 good years out of that, and we've got cities, and there's no more cities than named after St. Francis of Assisi, See, he was able to inflame the romantic imagination. 700 years later, there's still romance about Francis. There's romance about Claire. People have to fall in love. People get married, and I know very few people who make a rational decision to get married, I've looked at this person, study him on the internet, I think this is going to work, and so on. Things that'll be a fit, No, you fall in love. And sometimes not even happily, But same with religious life. We have to get people, again, they got to fall in love with it, We got to have some romantic ideal, We used to. I mean, the old romantic ideals don't work quite the same anymore. You can't show Bing Crosby with Going My Way. Doesn't quite do it. We have to have our own Going My Way, but that worked. Give you an example of that, more contemporary. Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton, in 1948, he wrote the book, Seven-Story Mountain. And for 20 years, the Trappists had to beat people away with sticks. Everybody discovered their inner monk, And everybody wanted to be a Trappist, Well, see, we need to, he caught the romantic imagination. We need to do that again with religious life. And I think we have a powerful romance. I don't know how to package it. If I did, I would, and so on. But we need to get young people again to fall in love. Say, I want to be a nun. Yeah, I think sisters are great, and so on. Like, they read Merton's book. I want to be a Trappist like Merton. I want to get my hair cut off and go there and live in silence in a yellow robe. It's going to be nice, We need to do that. Secondly, we need to re-inflame the religious imagination. I want to recommend an author in this, Wendy Wright, who's in fact, she's from here originally, teaching now at Creighton, and has written wonderfully on that. Partly documented her own conversion. She was a Hollywood actress. She was reading a book one day on St. Hubert, and she said, all of a sudden, what the hell is this all about? He was bilocating, and he was this place and that place and doing miracles. She said, I didn't believe it. She said, all of a sudden, I realized something. She said, the religious imagination, as I said this morning, it's archetypal, that we need to get back into mystery and grace and the levels, and we've lost some of that. We're children of the Enlightenment. All of a sudden, everything's rational. Mystery's gone. The deep things are gone, and we're trying to do theology with computers. It doesn't work. You do theology in archetypes, in mystery. Then thirdly, we need to offer a religious life that shows the compassion of Christ, as I said before. That's wide enough. That's inclusive enough. That after a while, we no longer have the old arguments about liberal models, conservative models, these kind of models, that we have Catholic models. And notice inside of Catholicism, everything fits. A simple example that I often use, and it's stunning. Not because I thought of it, it's just stunning because Catholicism's stunning. Remember 3 years ago, the two most popular movies in the whole world were Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ and Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11. What do those two movies have in common? They were both made by Roman Catholics speaking out of their Catholicism. I thought, nobody else can pull this off. We got Mel Gibson and Michael Moore inside of the same church. Usually you need about 10 churches with space in between to accommodate that, you know. That's Catholicism at its best. It can be liberal, it can be conservative, it can be justice, it can be pious, and all of the above. And our community has to start radiating that you don't have to pick. That's the beauty about Roman Catholicism. You don't have to pick whether you're Mel Gibson or whether you're what's the other guy, Michael Moore. There's room for both. And the most ideal would if you could get them in the same person. Somebody once said, what would happen if you put Mel Gibson and Michael Moore in a blender? Said you'd get Dorothy Day. Now that isn't a bad. And then you got a real Catholic. Okay. But see, to our credit, at least we can somehow, we have them both in the same building, inside of the same denomination. Our religious lives have to radiate that. Two more. The one of them is we need to be able to call with authority. And I've just talked about that. So we need to build communities, and we need to be personally integral enough and vulnerable enough that we can say to a young woman or a young man, we want your life. Join us. And some of the best vocations, that's probably many of you in this room, something? You never wanted to be a priest or a sister or a brother. You were called. And something? You've been really fruitful and really generative, and it wasn't your idea at all. I went recently to one of our priests. He was celebrating his 50th anniversary. A wonderful, generative man. He said something, I never wanted to be a priest. That was my mother's idea, and the parish priest, and they said, Henry, you should be a priest. I said, so I did it, and said, it's worked out pretty well, but see, he was called. His mother was able to say, the church needs priests. You should be one. The church needs nuns. You should be one, but we have to have the authority to do that, and it's a certain Christ authority that's in our lives or isn't. Okay, and the last one, and very importantly, is we need to have practical community to offer. I said this morning, pardon? Practical. But practical means real community. Remember the rich young man who we met this morning? He comes up to Jesus, and that part of the text I didn't take. Jesus says, leave everything and come and follow me. And that's a little bit misleading, because come and follow me, what does that mean? That's an accurate translation. But literally, Jesus is saying, come and move in with us. See, he was offering this young man a very practical alternative, which if we haven't got the community to do it, we can't even preach the gospel. I'll give you an example. As a priest, if I go into a pulpit on a Sunday morning, and I could do this to the church, and I could hammer people with guilt about justice. I go to church and say, we are rich, affluent, middle class, overprivileged Americans. There's people starving. There's this. And you have clothes that don't fit into your closet. We have more food than we eat. We're worried about keeping our weight down. Half the world is starving, and so on. All of which is true. But suppose I'm standing at the back of church afterwards, and a man comes over and he says, Father, you just cut me to the heart. Now what should I do? I'd say, well, nothing. It was just a homily, Because if he went and actually sold his house and gave it to the food bank and so on, 2 days later he'd be out on the street. I've done nothing. I've laid guilt on him, but I haven't offered him an alternative. If I could say, what you do, sell your house and come and move in with us. We got a place for you. See, that's kind of a literal way of putting it, but that's, people are looking for community. People are living lonely lives. People are searching, and as religious religious life, with the exception of the Desert Fathers, and there's a hermit or hermits, that's something different, But the form of religious life we're living, one of the huge things that's important is we're offering community. We're telling people, you're lonely, you need support, grace and community transforms you, move in with us. But to do that, we have to have a live community. that moving in means something. So that's a powerful challenge. Our present Superior General, that's kind of his mantra. He always tells us that, I don't care how you live or whatever. He said, but you got to be able to offer people community. I say, because living alone, they're already doing that. And there's not a question of whether you're under one roof or 5 roofs or whatever. Can we offer them something beyond aloneness? Can we offer them community? And see, that's the renewal of religious life and where we're going is certainly in that direction. I'm going to end. I want to read you a poem, which I was going to read to you earlier. It's from the poet Kabir. I like this thing, and then I'll stop here. He says, it's called The Time Before Death, okay? The poet Kabir. It goes this way. He says, the time before death. Friend, hope for the quest while you are alive. Jump into experience while you are alive. Think and think while you are alive. What you call salvation belongs to the time before death. If you don't break the ropes while you are alive, do you think that death will do it for you afterwards? That ghosts will break the ropes? The idea that the soul will join with the ecstatic just because the body is dead, all that is fantasy. What is found now is found then. If you find nothing now, you will simply end up with an apartment in the city of the dead. It's a good one. If you find nothing now, you'll simply end up with an apartment in the city of the dead. But if you make love with the divine now, in the next life you will have the face of satisfied desire. So plunge into the truth. Find out who the teacher is. Believe in the great sound. Kabir says this, when the guest is being searched for, it's the intensity of the search that makes all the work, that does all the work. Look at me, and you will see a slave to that intensity. Good little piece. Thank you very much. Okay.
And we'll use a similar format this afternoon that we used this morning. We'll have our panel introduce themselves first and then go right into their reflections with Father Ron and a kind of dialogue between them. So if we could start with Tracy.
Maybe. I'm Sister Tracy Sharp. I'm a member of the Sisters of Charity of Rolling Hills. We're a diocesan community in Los Angeles.
My name is Greg Jakubowicz. I'm a Franciscan friar from New York City, Holy Name Province, and I'm the Vocation Director.
I'm Andrea, and I'm a second-year candidate with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet.
I'm Laura Mattingly. I'm here from Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm here with the Dominican Sisters of Great Bend, Kansas.
And Andrea has decided, or chosen, to begin our response this afternoon.
Okay, forgive me, I'm very nervous. I don't do well speaking in front of people, so if I stumble. I think that my heart was very much stirred by what Father Ron was speaking about, especially in his discussion of the beloved disciple and what are we looking for, what am I looking for. And I'm looking for love. I'm looking for being in love with my God and with myself and with my community. And one of the image of the beloved disciple has actually been in my prayer for several months now, especially during my first year of candidacy. And that sense of really leaning into the heart of God and losing myself in that heartbeat and just wanting to follow it and be about it. And so I know that in religious life, in my discerning of religious life, the question that I ask myself is, how can I be in love? How can I stay in love? And what does that look like on the day-to-day? And of the 5 directions of religious life that Father Ron gave us, for me, I think the 5th one really ties into that. And do we have practical and real communities? And in my experience, it's how can those practical and real communities stir my love in the day-to-day nitty-gritty, and how can I be about that love of God and that gospel love, and to keep that flame really stirred. So that was, I think, what spoke to me and what affirmed me.
Thank you, Andrea. Laura?
Some of what Andrea said I feel the same way about, but I think something very touching that Father talked about was when he said, we must hear Jesus say, I love you. And that was really powerful to me, because I know everybody has their own relationship with God, their own intimacy with God, and when you think about it in tender terms like that, it's very moving. And one of the 5 things that he said at the end was re-inflaming, excuse me, there, I had to flip the page. Re-inflaming the romantic imagination. And I think once you say to God, God says to you as a gentle invitation, I love you, and it's gentle, and you respond and you're like, I love you too. And you can't really gauge how that love's gonna go, and you just have to let it go. And so for me, the re-inflaming the romantic imagination was like the image of a flame, and it was very powerful, and thank you, Father.
It was so rich, it was hard to come up with one point. I was very touched by the point about continuing to sing songs inside the flames, because I'm very, by nature, very attentive to language, but it's so important that we keep singing those songs of joy and of hope, even of sacrifice and suffering, but that we keep singing them within our communities and within the church. And I say that because I joined my community 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. I swear I was the only 18-year-old in the United States that was joining a religious community 20 years ago. Someone can prove me wrong, please. But I joined a community that was a generation older than me, and they had their issues and they had their problems. And we'd go to sisters' gatherings and stuff, and it was all about the issues and problems of this older generation, And I came in with different questions and different concerns and was immediately locked into the conservative, actually it's conservative category. But it stifles. And I think that we need to be careful in our language, and it's something I'm working on myself now, because I've moved out of the category that I was in, that I know that as a vocation director especially, that I need to be very careful what kind of song I'm singing for the next generation. And is there going to be a melody that will touch these hearts? And do I make room for harmony? Is there room for soprano and alto? 2 sopranos and 2 altos even. What kind of harmony can we make if they're singing at a slightly different, on a different line than I am? I think that it's very important, because cynical language, polarizing language, labels, they kill the possibility for the compassion that Ron spoke of so beautifully. It kills the possibility for vulnerability and leadership. If we use that, if our language isn't, if it isn't the beautiful song of God, and it definitely kills the possibility for romance. So I think language, singing the sacred songs inside the flames was very powerful for me.
Thanks, Tracy.
I want to thank Ron, though, for your insight and wisdom, and re-challenging us vocation directors on how do we help, I hate to use a business term, but how do we help market that compassion, that radiation that comes from our communities? Because I'm convinced that they're there. You travel around, and even within my own community and looking at some of the sister communities, there is that compassion. But I don't know if people see it. Sometimes it's as simple as putting up with the person you can't stand living with. How does someone see that, and how does that become prophetic? And I'm not quite sure what the answer is on that. And you invite people in, but even then, we're always on our best behavior. And I don't know about you, but I would never invite people to some of our houses, just because I want them to fall in love with us first, and then, you know, and then meet the rest of the guys. But I think that's part of the struggle I have as a vocation director for this first year is how do you get that radiation out there, that compassion that exists? It's difficult. I find also, I'm intrigued with that idea of appealing to the romantic. I mean, I know something of Thomas Merton. He lived at the school I went to undergraduate with, where he allowed the 7-story mountain, St. Bonaventure. And I look at that and I say, how do we do that? I know that the number of conferences, one of the guys I live with is a member of the Religious Brothers Conference, and nobody knows what a brother is anymore. And that's one of the things he said they're tackling with. How do you get that out there? I've met young women at St. Bonaventure University who don't know what a religious sister is. I mean, let's be honest, the days of being taught in a Catholic school where the sisters were present and visible role models aren't there. And so how do you get that romance out there, and how can we capture that imagination? I think that may be a challenge to us who are vocation directors in the religious communities. Is there something that, I don't know, is there a Thomas Merton here? Is there some song that can be sung that will appeal to you two? And what would appeal to you? If you don't mind my putting you on the spot, if you can think, what do you listen to? What brought you here? I mean, I'm just curious about that, to take some time. It can't be Disneyland. You could have done that without coming to the meeting, but what's captured, what was it that gave you the courage to respond to the call?
Well, now, you're not going to put me on the spot, and oh my goodness. I think what brought me here was a very gentle and wonderful invitation from my vocation director. After we had gone as a group from Great Bend, Kansas to do mission work in New Orleans, Louisiana. And we stayed at Rosaryville in Ponchatoula. And I'm going to tell you what, the place had its own heartbeat, and something very wonderful happened there. The group of us that went were looking at religious life, but there were some little ones that went. They were 15, 16, 17 years old. That's young. They were so cute. We took them canoeing and everything. But I think the thing that it was just a subtle, just a very strong movement. And so we got back home. Goodbyes were hard in Denver, and I got back home to Kentucky, and I talked to my folks, and I told them, I said, I've just had the time of my life, and it was just wonderful. And so for me, it was something moving on the inside that I couldn't really name. And now that I'm here and I'm up in front of all these wonderful people, I think that it must be love.
Andrea, do you have a response to what?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm exactly answering your question, but you had mentioned that you're not sure if that compassion shows and if it's visible to people. And, well, at least it shows with the Sisters of St. Joseph. But I think that what attracted me initially to religious life was I didn't meet any sisters really until I was in college. I was undergrad at Mount St. Mary's College, and I absolutely fell in love with the sisters that I met because of their joy, because of their passion, because of their compassion. And it just really struck something inside of me that said, at my deepest core, that's who I want to be, and that's who I am. Now, how can I make it happen? And so I'm sure that's not something that's exclusive to the CSJs. So I think that our religious communities are doing that and are living and breathing it. And like you said, it's, maybe how do we market that? But it's there, and it inspires me every day, and it fuels my love. So thank you to all of you for being who you are and letting us know that we can be our true selves.
Wow, thank you.
Just two brief comments on the question, and all of you mentioned the need to inflame the romantic imagination, but how to do that. And it's interesting when you look at the history of religious life and the people who did it. Notice, and this is a challenge I want to leave to everybody in the room, especially to the younger people in the room, that doesn't happen so much by a community, that happens by a single man or a single woman. So that, you get Francis of Assisi, Clare of Assisi, Dominic, Teresa of Avila. See, they were wild individuals who simply, and they each of them was, well, Francis and Clare kind of started their own charism, but others, they were already inside of a charism, but they simply took it and they put a whole new romanticism and a whole new incarnation to it. And so I think the challenge for all of us in this room here, particularly those who are younger in religious life, is maybe you are the Clare or the Francis or the Dominic or whoever, but notice when you say these names, those were individuals then who, Dominic, Clare, Francis, so on, they were wild individuals. And God has always given them to us, and maybe they're in this room, or the person's in, but so it's not going to be so much, communities, we have our role to renew, but that kind of renewal, it's not going to happen out of a community chapter, although we try. Lord knows the always, we've been trying, and and you've been to many of those meetings many times and so on, and we need to do them, but the history of religious life hasn't been so much that a community did it, an individual inside of a community, or just an individual in the desert, wild, did it. The other thing, just to comment too on Greg's point about you first want to make him fall in love with the community, and then you show him the rest of the community. Okay. No, it's a very important point. Today, when we talk about, when we talk about community, and sometimes we've killed ourselves precisely, ironically, with an over-romanticization of community. The same as an over-romanticization of marriage can be death to a marriage. If you go into a marriage and it's just going to be Hollywood and everything perfect, there's going to be a lot of disappointments, But I want to say something pretty earthy, because many of us have lived in these communities, and they're healthy in spite of all this. But, and it was one of the things that bigger communities can do. When I was first joined the Oblates, it was in a seminary community, which we were about 70 people. And then when I lived in Rome for 6 years, just recently in our general council, we were 70 people in a house. And you know what's wonderful about those communities? You can have 5 or 6 complete nutcases, and they don't hurt anybody. They're just, they're completely absorbed. That community can simply pick up those pathologies and work with it and so on. The struggle comes out more when we're smaller communities. See, if you're 3 or 4 people in the house, or 2 people, if one is crazy, it's not going to work, And sometimes we have to be realistic about, the sizes of our communities, because the task of every community is also, and you're always going to have, not just in a religious community, but in every community that there is, about 10 to 12% of your people are going to be dysfunctional at all times. That's true for civic communities, business communities, academic communities, and so on. It'll always be true for religious communities. If you have 100 people, 10 are nuts, or borderline, and that's true. I want to say this gently, okay? So community life has to be set up to handle that. And so, Greg, it's a good point. First, show them the other 90, okay? And then later on, they can also meet the other 10, and they won't do any harm, okay?
According to my logic, there are 40 nutcases in this room. I raised my hand. I admit it. Any last minute reflections? We have just a couple minutes left if you have anything else that kind of bubbled up. No? Well, we thank you again. I thank you panelists for taking the jump again. I said to the board when we were determining if the young people would have the guts to stand up in front of 400 people. And I said, you know what? If they're entering religious community today and they want to have a voice, they better use their own, because that's what it is. And so I applaud them for taking that stance. We're now going to go into table process, just like we did this morning, and then after that, we'll follow with the open mic again, okay?
Any response or question, resonance in any way, there are the mics in the same positions as they were this morning. And also, just to remind you again, just the protocol that is on the yellow sheet so that the conversation continues to move. Right? So the floor is yours, and the mic is yours.
I've always been so shy. I'm Father Steve Powick. I'm a Glenmary Home Missioner living in Grayson, Kentucky in the Appalachian Mountains. Many things touched me, but I think the sense of going beyond labels, the compassion of Christ, that third idea you mentioned, that was also reflected in the image of washing each other's feet, that somehow to get beyond the labels of liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, Iraq, Iran, United States, all of these polarizations, it strikes a deep, deep core within me, because I've seen the pain in my own community. I've seen the pain in the parishes I've served. And so that's the thing when the imagination comes in. I don't know how we get there, but to go beyond labels, to really try to love each other in the best sense of that. And so I'm encouraged by what you say. I don't know the insights of beginning that, but I think there's a secret there. Maybe just to be very bold and say an example where it hinders growth. As a religious priest, I like to concelebrate. When I'm with religious women, I tend not to. For right or wrong, because I'm concerned about being labeled. I'm also concerned about hurting people. We have to find a way to dialogue so each of us is free to be ourselves without label and judgment. We're not there yet. I hope we're getting there, and your invitation to go beyond gives me courage.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm not going to say anything other than to say I couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the, maybe just to put a word to it, you know, when we say that psalm in Scripture, which we pray quite often, and it begins, it says, "Sing to the Lord a new song." And I always wonder what the old song was. Okay. But I think the old song is the one we've been singing a lot, and that is that perennial thing between you're liberal, I'm conservative, I'm liberal, you're conservative, you know, you wear a collar, I don't, you have veil, I don't, you can celebrate or I don't, and so on. That we need to move healthily beyond that. Part of the new song is, you know, or I watch, you know, Mel Gibson, but not Robert Moore. I watch Robert Moore, but not Mel Gibson, you know. And we have some models, not many, you know. Like I mentioned, somebody like Dorothy Day. That's what made her so outstanding. Or somebody like Jim Wallace, you know, who's an evangelical, but in some sense has been able to just transcend all of that and give the rest of us hope. Say that there's truth all over. Christ was compassion. He says compassion is beyond ideology. And so I'll come back on his caption, which I very much like. See, that we don't begin by self-defining. I'm a conservative, or I'm a liberal, or I'm in the middle. But you begin by saying, I'm a woman or a man of faith. I'm going to follow Christ. I'm going to try to be fully compassionate, and wherever that takes you. And some days you might be celebrating, and some days you might not be. Some days you might be, you know, wearing a collar, and some days you might not be. Just, you know, that you try to go with compassion and where it takes you. But I think it's really an important thing, because all of us in this room, we're in situations all the time where that tension is, you can cut it with a knife, you know? And it's after 25 years, we just get real tired, too. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just all be who we are and didn't have to apologize for it or worry about, you know, what statement we're making?
I'm Paul Charbonneau, a Viatorian from Quebec, Montreal. And Father said we are a secular society compared to the U.S. Okay. I would not define Quebec as a church-going population, as you do in America. You spoke, the first suggestion tells us we have to re-inflame our romantic imagination. You told us we lack romance. Now, is this romance? I would like you to explain a little bit more what you want to say with that. I know it's our intimacy with Jesus, with God. It's the showing of our love for one another. Is there anything else besides that? In order to attract, I know we have to have excitement in what we do, but anything else besides that?
Well, I want to quote one of the young people here, Laura, who said, it's a question of falling in love. You know, again, take the analogy of marriage. You know, you rarely get two people who make a rational, in our culture, in some societies, the marriages are arranged, and ironically, these tend to work better than romantic marriages, but that's something else, okay. But see, in our culture, very few people get married on a rational decision. You know, some do, but not often. Usually, you fall in love. And notice it's not something you pick, you just fall in love. And then some months or years later, and Marriage Encounter has a good line about that. They say at that point, love becomes a decision. Do I want to stay married to this person? Do I pick to love this person? The first time you do, you didn't pick that. You just fell in love. You know, take that for in terms of a religious vocation. I think today, and we meant well, it was partly what I talked about this morning about the deconstruction of religious life and all of which had its place and was very healthy in some ways. But it got to a point where I think unconsciously we were saying, unless we can find a woman or a man who's already so mature, knows everything, and is already Francis of Assisi or Mother Teresa, we don't have a place for them, you know? See, so we weren't trying to just, let's get some young woman or man just to fall in love with the ideal of religious life, the way Merton did. You know, Merton wrote, he didn't intend that book, he just wrote this highly over-romanticized version of the Trappist life, and people read it, and there's an inner Trappist inside of everybody. Inside of everyone, there's an inner monk inside of us, and wow, I'm going to be a monk. I'm going to be. See, they fell in love with an ideal. And a generation or so ago, we still had that for religious life. I went to the Diablo novitiate in 1965. It was just the tail end of that. Where we were just moving out of the age of Bing Crosby and going my way, and you know we still had the flying nun on television kind of thing and so on. But I don't want to be cynical about that. That had its own mystique and had its own mystery to it, and it drew some people. Sometimes, in fact, drew lots of people. Maybe later on, 10 years later, we woke up inside of a convent or a seminary and says, this isn't going my way at all, you know? Okay. Okay. But then we were there. Then it was like marriage. Then you could still make a decision and say religious life is a decision. But I like what Greg says. I like to get them to fall in love with the community before we show them the rest. Okay. You know, there's some great pedagogy in that. See, so we fell in love with our communities before we saw fully the cost of the cross and everything else. And oftentimes, then we'd have the maturity. The same as people fall in love with each other, and 5 years later, they can say to each other, I'm going to stay with you because you're a good person, and this is the right thing to do, you know? Let me give you a biblical thing on that. You know, that happened to the apostles. They fell in love with Jesus. And that's the whole, you know, in Scripture, whenever you read the word Galilee is magic. That's where they met Jesus, where they fell in love with Jesus. That's where they walked on water. That's where all the miracles happened. And remember, at a certain point, Jesus says, now we got to go down to Jerusalem. and there's huge resistance. See, Jerusalem was where humiliation, death, pain, the agony in the garden, the crucifixion, all the painful stuff happens in Jerusalem. The falling in love, the honeymoon is in Galilee, you know. But, you know, in all of the four Gospels, there's a breaking point where Jesus says to go to Jerusalem, and it's break point time, as Tennis says. Now, John has the clearest. In John, in chapter 6, Jesus gives the bread of life discourse, and John says after he said that, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, John said they all walked away. Everybody left. 5,000 people, he got 12 left. He goes over to the 12 and he says, do you want to leave too? And Peter said, in fact, we'd like to, but we have no other place to go. Okay. And that isn't a bad line. Sometimes we meet in rigid life and saying, oh man, God, I'd love to live this community. I'm 70 years old. I don't know what I'd do. Well, you're in good company, you know. But then he says the next thing, which is the best thing Peter says in Scripture, because Peter doesn't always get it right. In fact, Peter rarely gets it right, but he gets it right here, you know. He said, we'd like to walk away. We have no other place to go, but we're not going to go. He said, because you have the words of everlasting life. That's quite a statement. That's quite a confession. You have the words of everlasting life, but it's where he's speaking from. You know what Peter's saying at that point? He's saying to Jesus, you know something? We don't get you, and what we get we don't like. And today you look like death, but we know we're better off not getting it with you than getting it with somebody else. I said that in class once, and the man said, sounds like my marriage. Okay. And everybody laughed, and he said, no, I'm really serious. He said, that's the whole point. He says, if you've ever been in any commitment, marriage or religious life or something, there are going to be times when you say, today this looks like death, except I know that life for me lies remaining here. You know? See, Peter is saying, today you look like death, but you have the words of everlasting life that I know that long range this is going to bring me life. Doesn't feel like it today. You know, it's a very important thing. You know, in the therapeutic community, they ask this question, they ask it right. It's the right question. It isn't always answered right. So you go in for counseling on a vocation thing or a love thing or something, and the therapist says to you, what do you really want to do? It's a very dangerous question. Why? Because you have so many levels. Notice Peter says, at one level, I'd really like to walk away from you. But there's a deeper level where I know you bring the words of life. But see, that's already the second stage of discipleship. You know, I think sometimes unconsciously we brought religious life to young people and asked them to make that decision. You got to first fall in love. We got to first give them Galilee. And after a honeymoon, you ask the person, you want to go to Jerusalem with me? We've been to Hawaii together. That's one thing. And that's been okay. You can have a honeymoon with a lot of people, but the honeymoon's important. John of the Cross is one of the great mystics. He would never be cynical about a honeymoon. He says, that's precisely what gives you, if it's good, gives you the strength and connects you deeply enough that when crunch time comes, then you can say like Peter, you know, today I'd like to walk away, but you have the words of everlasting life. I'm going to stay, you know. But see, we need to, biblically, we need to set up Galilee for young people. See, Jesus, he didn't start them out in Jerusalem. Notice the first thing he tells the disciples is not, you know, we're going to go down to Jerusalem, we're all going to get killed down there. He says, no, we're going to start a kingdom of God in the world. We're going to walk on water, raise dead bodies. Every time we turn over a stone, angels are going to come out. And for a while it actually did, you know. And then at a certain point he says, now it's crunch time. Now to finish this off, we got to go to Jerusalem, we got to die. But he didn't start them out there. See, first you fall in love. Later on, love becomes the decision. And I think that's the part we've kind of skipped. And not because we wanted to, because it's not that easy to inflame this romantic imagination. We need a new Francis. We need a new Claire. We need a new Teresa. We need, you know, or the little flower did that, Therese, you know. Or just, they could inflame the romantic imagination. And people say, I want to be like that. Thomas Merton did it. If we knew the formula, we'd do it. And I mean, that's the challenge to every one of us in this room, old and young, you know. Are you that wild woman or that wild man that's going to be the new Francis or Claire or somebody else?